And we're visiting today with Jim Beers, who's retired from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service after serving for 30 years. Warner is in Canada, and Warner, you go ahead and continue with your question there.
I find it outright offensive that all those regulations and so are being hacked out from the city and from government offices. And who is more schizophrenic than the government? On one side, they are concerned about the environment. On the other side, I think you had Rosalind Peterson on about this 5-year military exercise all the way into Idaho and into Colorado, where they want to unleash whatever that they got in their arsenal and cause massive environmental destruction. And in the marine areas where they want to kill up to, they anticipate a kill among the marine mammals of over 11 million of them, you know. And this is all coming from the government, you know. There's nothing more schizophrenic than the government.
Yeah. You know, Jim, unfortunately, I'm looking at the clock. We're almost up to break time again. Longer segment straight ahead. But, you know, Warner brings up a very interesting point, and I think it's a point that really I've made a lot of times myself, and that is that all of this stuff that they're doing is serving to accomplish the exact opposite of their stated intent. In this case, what they're, you know, we see all this environmental degradation going on by these multinational corporations, which they empower, the government empowers. It seems like they're in bed with the major corporations, and everything that the corporations do cause environmental degradation and destruction. And, I mean, we've got Monsanto out there, genetically modifying seeds. The pollen goes through the air, contaminates other plants. You know, let's go ahead and take the break, and when we come back, maybe you can address some of this, because I don't think all of this is accidental. You know, we had the situation last year in the Gulf of Mexico with this oil geyser that was gushing out, and then they sprayed Corexit there, which probably did more damage than the oil. It'd be kind of interesting to get your thoughts on that as well. Hey, hang on us. We'll take a few-minute break. We'll be back here in a moment. Stay with us. All right, we're back. This is Govern America. I'm Darren Weeks. The website, by the way, is www.governamerica.com. That's governamerica.com. That's our official website here for this program. I don't think I've given it out the entire program so far. So anyway, my email address is radio@governamerica.com. And, Jim, I don't know. Do you have a website, Jim?
No, I don't. I had one and it got shut down on me, and then get bombarded out of it. And I've tried using blog sites to put my things up, and they drop me after a short time. So I write things and send it to about 500 people, and they spread it all around the country. And I give talks fairly regularly all over the country. And so I try to get the word out the best I can. You know,
it's interesting that your blogs keep getting shut down. You know, I have a listener, and in fact, I've known a couple of different people who put out some sensitive information, and they've experienced the same similar type thing. So maybe somebody doesn't like the message, Jim.
Well, I think that's exactly what it is. But to be honest with you, I'm not. I know how to write on the computer and how to send things out and do some things, but I mean, I'm not anywhere near qualified to keep a website up and fight viruses and the whole 9 yards.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I just do the stuff I can do the best I can. And
well, I'll tell you what, anything you want to send that you want published, I'll be happy to publish it on our site, too.
Okay,
so
thanks.
You want to send it my way. But anyway, we have Warner on the line in Canada, New Brunswick, and also Buddy in Arkansas. Buddy, just hang on with us.
Can I'll make a couple of quick comments for Warner here.
Okay.
And I just received, just a couple of days ago, a copy of a letter from one of your Canadian compatriots by the name of Dr. Geist, who is on Victoria Island on the other side of Canada there from you. Yeah. And he was talking about how when recently a pack of wolves came into the area, they live on Victoria Island, all the deer disappeared, and they found a lot of carcasses, and they'd killed them. And the swans that they had around their homes all disappeared, and they had to have the government come in and control those wolves and get rid of the pack. And he said that the next year, about half of the swans came back, but the next year another pack of wolves moved in there, and they had to come in and remove those, and the swans have never returned. And the deer, there are no deer around there at all left there, and no coyotes either. But the cost of that control work by the government is a big factor. Canada's got trapping. You can shoot wolves. In fact, for the first time in my lifetime, I think non-resident hunters that go up there to hunt deer and that elk can shoot a wolf waller up there. They didn't used to have that. They're trying to get those darn wolves back under control at as little cost as possible. But that cost of controlling those wolves when they get out of hand like that, near homes and everything, is very exorbitant. And here we are in this country going broke, and we're putting the darn things all over the place. We're going to have them on the edges of cities pretty darn quick. And, you know, your question about the government being tied up with land in Colorado and other things and exploiting it, I was called in about 2 years ago now to help some people with a large military base, an artillery base that wanted to expand and condemn about another county and a half around it, and they aren't hardly using what they've got, a big base there. And in trying to help them fight off this condemnation of all of their property, come to find out that the Nature Conservancy had a mailbox out on the base.
Wow.
And the Nature Conservancy has got people that go in and out and have mailboxes in the Pentagon.
Oh, wow.
Not only when they expand property is the Nature Conservancy involved in it, but when they the big thing is when they dispose of federal property. Every once in a while, Congress gets all upset about so much land in military bases, and it needs to be given back because we're not using it anymore. Well, the Nature Conservancy brokers the giving it back to different federal agencies as a refuge like they do in Denver, and the county authorities and the state authorities. The Nature Conservancy handles that. And then the Nature Conservancy works with those same people to get buy land nearby and then resell it to them when they get money. Mm-hmm. The federal government meets with the Nature Conservancy all the time to plan out, well, we want to buy that property over there, and we want to put a refuge over there, and we want to put a new site or park over here, and we don't have the money for it right now. The Nature Conservancy goes over and buys it or takes easements on it, so it's not worth anything anymore, and then holds it for the government. And when the government suddenly comes up with money because some senator wants to get reelected and they want to name it the new Jim Beers National Wildlife Refuge or something, mm-hmm. the Nature Conservancy sells it back to the government, not only at a big markup, but for a hefty handling fee, too. So mm-hmm. that there's so much of this incestuous stuff going on. When you get digging into it, you almost want to just run away and hide in a barn or something. It's just crazy.
Talk about wolves in sheep's clothing. And
yeah,
most
exactly.
Of environmental organizations are.
So that's exactly right. Yeah, it's well put.
Do you have anything else there, Warner, before I let you go?
As I say, but it's the main line is when you look at the communist agenda.
Yeah, it's the same thing. When you were talking about how they're exactly the opposite of what they are. Yeah. Remember how the communists used to call countries that they would conquer people's republics and all this kind of stuff, and
they still
freedom-loving peoples, blah blah blah, and they they were all slaves.
Yeah, and during their reign, they over 78 years they brought how many? Nearly 100 million people into the communist paradise.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right.
As I say,
paradise where the blood flows freely.
There's some people around that have some common sense, and that are able to cut through all the crap and all the spin and all the dialectic that's been passed on by mainstream media and by the government. And Darren,
absolutely,
thank you very much for the work you're doing.
Thank you. I appreciate it, Warner. Thank you so much for the call. All right, let's go ahead and take Buddy in Arkansas if he's still there. Buddy, and by the phone number is 800-313-9443. That's 800-313-9443. Buddy,
hello.
Good morning. Yeah, you're on the air.
Okay. I just want to tell you guys you're doing a wonderful job, and you've got 20/20 vision. And then I want to ask a question. And I really believe that these guys are worried, and they're trying to dot all their T's and everything, and we're forcing them to play their hand a little quicker than they wanted to. And you guys my hat's off to you, because as there ever was a 1776 again, it seems like it's right about now. My question was to this gentleman, and I'm sure they are messing with his website, are they messing with the snakes, the reptiles in the, they seem to be have changed since I was a little boy. I'm 69, and they seem to be more aggressive, and they just don't seem to be the same snakes they used to be. Would you know anything about that, Jim?
I would suspect, and I mean I'm just saying this off the top of my head, but I think like a lot of other animals, the snakes are less harassed than they used to be by other animals that try to kill them and give them a hard time, and they aren't shot at as much by people, so that they become more familiar around people. I think that's very true. Just like 50 years ago, all of the books said that if you're going to have wild turkeys again, that they had to have wilderness and no timber cutting, and there shouldn't be any roads there, blah, blah. And I mean, so we dump them out everywhere for hunting seasons, and they've taken hold and they're chasing mailmen around Boston, okay, and they're hanging out in St. Paul, where I live here in Minnesota, right downtown. They have a big flock down there. So a lot of these animals, the coyotes in the Northeast, when they came back into the eastern United States over the last 30 or 40 years, they're denning real close to where people live in these natural pathways that they put all around the place for joggers and bikers. The coyotes come in there and they den in there, and then they pop out of there when they got pups to feed, and they're jumping into backyards trying to drag off little 1- and 2-year-old kids if they're unattended in the backyard. Try to kill them right away and drag them off because it's just a little piece of meat to them. And if you'd have said that kind of thing 50 years ago, why, if you put coyotes out there, they'll be jumping into yards like that. People say, oh, no, they live way out in the wilderness, out in the rural areas. It's no big deal. So these animals, as they are not bothered, get more and more harassed. I was told the other day by a rancher I was talking to in South Dakota that his neighbor came home last week, or maybe the week before, one night, with his wife just as it was getting dark, and there was 5 coyotes in the yard attacking his dog. And one of the coyotes was dead. He ran in the house to get his gun, and by the time he came out, he killed 2 as they ran off, but they had already killed his dog. And he said they never saw that many coyotes, but he said the government's not trapping coyotes anymore. He said the young men aren't out there shooting them and trapping them like they used to because, the men are all getting feminized in the schools and told that you shouldn't own a gun, and it's harder for them to take a gun anywhere or learn how to use one because if they catch them with it under the age of 18, they're going to put them in prison and all this other nonsense. The bottom line is that the animals, like those wolves out west that are going into everybody's yard at 2 in the morning and hanging around bus stops, get bolder and bolder and behave differently than you or I say, look at them and say, well, they never did that 20 years ago. I was out here all the time, never saw that before. A lot of this stuff is because we don't bother them.
Well, if they're not shot at, then they get bolder.
You are a breath of fresh air, Jim. You're a breath of fresh air, and God bless you, and God bless America, and I'm going to let you guys continue to spread the word. Thank you for everything, sir.
I appreciate the call, buddy. Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.
We have another caller, but I don't think I want to take it before the break because I don't think we have time to do that. But, that's the thing, Jim. We have a convergence of different issues here, and one of the major things is that the less that we do in terms of shooting at these things, the bolder they get and the more problematic they get. And I don't know what it's going to take for the people to raise up and, they're already raising up. We talked about that story earlier. In Oregon, they're demanding at the state capitol, and I really think that's what it's going to take. It's going to take people doing just that. I mean, to me, it doesn't really matter what the federal government does. The states have the right. The states have the authority constitutionally to stand up and make policy. And we're already starting to see some states, I believe Utah, stand up and start to take some of the land back by eminent domain from the federal government because they have so much that have been taken and tied up by the federal government that it's hindering their economic development. So we're seeing the states start to stand up and do things, but it needs to be a lot more. All right, we're back. This is Governor America. I'm Darren Weeks, and we're visiting with Jim Veers of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. He is retired now, and I want to get back to your story there, Jim, and have you finish that up because I think this is important. We have a couple of callers on the line, and just hang with us. Don in Alabama, Eleanor in Ontario. Just hang with us. We will get to you. But, Jim, we were talking earlier about this morphing at the agency and how over time, starting back, I guess, in the late 1960s, they began to bring in these, these people who weren't really qualified to do the job. And then we saw changes in policy an entire morphing of the agency into something that was more politically driven rather than scientifically and wildlife management driven. And what happened with you? Now, I know that, ultimately this whole thing culminated with you being forced out of the agency. I would like you to, if you can, give us a sense of exactly how that process came about.
Well, as I told you about the kind of people that they started hiring in the 70s and 80s, then you had two kinds. You had people that were totally indifferent to what the agency did. It was like getting a job at the insurance company. And if they say we're going to sell more of these kind of things, or we want you to do less of that, you did it. That was your job. Okay. Mm-hmm. The other ones were ideologues that were in here to finally save the animals, to stop the rape of the environment, blah blah blah, and all this stuff. They were whatever, they were motivated by that. But the people that controlled the agency then could use both of those kind of people to their own ends, because they were catering more and more to these groups, like I mentioned before, the Refuge Association that wanted more refuges, and the History Association that wanted more parks, and the HSUS and the Animal Welfare Institute and the Sierra Club and the Nature Conservancy and PETA and all. They were more and more catering to them and pushing aside the old Ducks Unlimited and Pheasants Forever and the Trout Unlimited and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And the truth is those agencies started to change themselves because they didn't want to lose out on their political influence too. So they were all kind of quietly and secretly, if you will, in the 80s and into the 90s, secretly doing this stuff. More and more state fish and wildlife agencies were getting their money from the federal government through the Endangered Species Act and through the Environmental Education Act and all of this stuff to push philosophies like, we should have a native ecosystem out there. The National Wildlife Refuge that was founded for taking care of waterfowl so that Canada and Mexico and the United States didn't shoot too many ducks and had ducks and geese that were replenishing themselves and wintering in areas and breeding so that we could all enjoy them and hunt them. That was going to be changed into a native ecosystem like parks and blah, 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 and all this stuff. Now, in the 90s when Clinton got elected, and I don't mean to sound political, but you got to say this stuff.
Well, no, this has been a bipartisan thing all along. Yeah. I mean, as we pointed out, it started back in the 1960s. There have been several administrations since, both Republican and Democrat. Any Republican that came in office could have started the reversal process, and they haven't. They just kind of went along with the whole thing. So, yeah, I mean, you're not beating up on Clinton. They're all the same.
At that time, I was working with the grant, sending the money that was collected on arms and ammunition to the state fish and wildlife agencies. That's where it all is supposed to go, okay, for certain kinds of projects. The state fish and wildlife agencies were only supposed to use them for wildlife restoration and not for all this other nonsense. But anyway, I was doing that when the European Union was lobbied, and a lot of the officials over there, government officials, were bribed by the same groups we're fighting here, the Humane Society and the Animal Welfare Institute and that whole bunch of enviros, had bribed them to pass a thing that said they were going to do away with any importation of furs from countries that wouldn't ban the leg hole trap. The leg hole trap was extremely important for trapping and for getting fur in the United States, Canada, and Russia, the biggest exporters of furs in the world. Europe was the biggest importer. And we were the biggest of all exporters here in the United States. And trapping is run by the state governments here in the United States, even though the federal government has tried twice to just pass a law to say they were going to take it over, unsuccessfully. But be that as it may, the states could not deal with foreign governments. So the Trade Representative's Office and the State Department were dealing with the European Union to get them to reverse that very, very harmful act they had passed to ban fur importation. And I got asked to be on the two delegations representing the state fish and wildlife agencies because I was a federal employee and I could do that. Well, the State Department people and U.S. Trade Representatives people were all people who, I don't know any. What are they still trapped for? People don't need to wear fur. What's the big deal? I don't think this is very important. And I was fighting like dickens with them and with the European Union starting in the early to mid-'90s, okay? But at the same time, I was handling these excise taxes. And when Clinton got elected, just like when Obama got elected, there was a big surge of gun purchases and ammunition purchases because everybody was convinced that he was going to try and get rid of guns. So the taxes should have gone way up. The collection, the money that went to the state fish and wildlife agencies for hunting and fishing should have gone way up, and it didn't. Anyway, I saw that, noticed it, but I was really busy with the things I was doing, and, I'm doing my work, and I'm going over to Europe. At the same time, the new director of the Fish and Wildlife Service, a woman, was having secret meetings, I didn't realize until later, with the Humane Society and all these other groups, radical groups in Washington in her office late in the afternoon and the evening. Because
let's get the gist of those secret meetings when we come back from the bottom of the hour break. Longer segment straight ahead, folks. So we're visiting with Jim Beers, and we have a couple of calls on the line. We'll get to you, folks. Just hang with us. This is Govern America. We'll be back here in a moment. Stay with us. All right, we're back. This is Govern America, visiting with Jim Beers. And, Jim, before the break, you were talking about how you were involved in these negotiations to get the, this edict that they weren't going to import, Europe wasn't going to import fur if it was caught in a leg trap. And you were appointed to help try to get these people to reverse that. And then you were just getting ready to talk about how a lady who was the head of the Fish and Wildlife Service was secretly holding meetings.
Yeah, and those people that she was holding meetings with wanted me off of that delegation because they wanted the European law that they had all bribed these people to pass there in Europe. And I'm telling you the truth there. They wanted me off of that because they were afraid that I was being too chance of being successful. But the Clinton people did not want to appear to be anti-trapping or anti-state fish and wildlife agency authorities. So they were keeping that all secret. And they were yelling my name in the office, in the director's office. I found all this out later from people that overheard them down the hall, because a lot of people knew me and were friendly with me. But they were scared to death of these people because they were screaming that they wanted me fired and gotten rid of, and the director was going to try and do that. Well, they wound up, because we were successful, the European Union backed down on that thing. They came after me and tried to fire me. They said they were going to transfer me, and when I said, well, I'm not going anywhere. I got kids in college. My wife's got 2 jobs. I said, I was doing security work at the time.
So you did your job too well is basically what it boils down to.
Exactly. But anyway, they came after me, and they threatened to do away with my pension, which they couldn't do. They said they were going to suspend paying my health care for 5 years, and they even then called the police and said that they were going to fire me, which they had not given me any notice of firing me, and that they thought I might be dangerous. And so the police actually came to the offices on a Monday morning looking for me, and luckily by then I had hired a lawyer. He told me to stay home, and the police were checking cars going in and out of the parking lot and the front door, asking if Beers was in the car, or they wanted to see a picture ID from everybody. Well, at the time I didn't know they were going to call the police at all. There was never any indication of me being a problem. But I had 3 gun permits at the time. I had a Virginia gun permit, I had a permit that allowed me to carry in D.C., and one that allowed me to carry in Maryland. And if I'd have blundered into that, not knowing what was going on, I could have very easily been shot. I mean, if I'd have acted kind of stupid and went to put my hand in my pocket or something, these guys knowing that I may be dangerous and they've been called in to look for me and stop me from coming into the building, and that I've got gun permits, God knows what could have happened. But anyway, when they sent me home at that time, and I had a lawyer, and the people up in Congress heard about that, and they asked me to come up and tell them what was going on, and I told them, and they were listening to me, and I mentioned that the excise tax money from arms and ammunition hadn't gone up. They said, oh, really? In 1994, Gingrich and the Republicans took over the House of Representatives, and they fired a whole big committee full of people, and one of the guys who was in charge there, as a big Democrat activist, was put in the Fish and Wildlife Service a week later. The Clinton people hired him and put him in there in charge of those excise taxes. And anyway, that guy is now up for director of the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Wow.
But anyway, he and the director really wanted to get rid of me, but between my lawyer and these people at Congress asked me to testify about the what do you call it, the funds that didn't seem to be there, which I did. And they had a GAO audit done of the Fish and Wildlife Service, and make a real long story short, the Fish and Wildlife Service tried to baffle them with boxes and boxes and boxes of printouts that nobody except somebody that worked in budget and the Fish and Wildlife Service could read. Well, I had worked in budget. They called me up on the Hill, and I went through that with some of the GAO people. They conducted an audit and found out that they had stolen, the Fish and Wildlife Service had stolen $45 to $60 million out of those funds that are supposed to go to our state hunting and fishing programs, and used it to introduce wolves into Yellowstone, up in Idaho up there, and to trap them up in Alaska, as well as open up an office in California that Congress had specifically refused to fund, just like they refused to fund any more wolf introductions, and they went ahead and did it anyway. And by the time they found out about this, the wolves were already out loose and on their way and everything, and nobody ever got in trouble for it. And to tell you how perverse the state fish and wildlife agencies had gotten by then, they never asked for the money to be replaced. The GAO audit was on file, and it was testified to by the head of GAO, the head of the audit, and another hearing that I testified at later on that. So
somebody should have went to prison, Jim.
Well, you bet they should have. And I finally got a settlement from the government, and for 3 years, according to that settlement, I had to sign a thing that said I would not speak or write anything about anything to do with my departure from the federal government. So they take your tax money and pay guys like me a settlement with it and say that I cannot tell anybody. Talk about something right straight out of Stalin's Russia or something. That's it. The newspaper should have been on me like a duck on a June bug, and I should have been saying what I'm saying to you right now, and they should have answered it or not answered it and something done about it. Nothing ever got done about it. I could not speak for 3 years, or I would have to return all of the settlement money that they had given me. So that's kind of what got me into this writing and speaking, and why at first, I just wrote about other things, and then when the 3 years was up, I got into this.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and go to the phone line since we have a couple of people that have been holding on for a while. Don in Alabama. Don, thanks for holding on.
For letting me talk. Thank you for letting me talk.
Sure.
Jim, do you have a website and an email address that we can contact you and get you to come speak here in Alabama?
You bet. I've got an email address, and I don't have a website anymore, but my email address is Jim Beers, JIMBEERS, the number 7, at Comcast.net.
Comcast.net.
Yeah, Jim Beers 7 at Comcast.net.
Thank you.
Thank
Jim.
you.
And I worked for the Department of Conservation in the state of Alabama for 22 years, and I was fired in 2005 because the covert hostile homosexual females wanted me fired.
Mm-hmm.
And so they've got a new commissioner now, and he doesn't favor that type of agenda going on. And I didn't favor it. I opposed it, and I stood up and spoke out against it. They were blatantly, just boldly saying that they're going to promote more female homosexuals, and they did.
Yep. And they get away with this stuff. They're like anybody else, that when they get away with things, they just keep getting bolder and bolder and bolder about it.
Yes, and that covert hostility in those female homosexuals is destroyed the Conservation Department in Alabama.
Really?
Yes, sir. And if with a little investigation, you would find the female of the Fish and Wildlife, head of the Fish and Wildlife, she is also probably more like a covert hostile homosexual. Are you familiar with Henry McCow's Cruel Hoax book that he had wrote?
No, I'm not.
If you hadn't, you may want to www.cruelhoax.ca. He's in Canada, so it's .ca. Cruelhoax.ca. And he explains how the feminism, these groups like the Sierra Club and all, that's how they infiltrate the conservation departments and the wildlife, fish and wildlife, is through these covert female hostile women, because they're manipulative. And they just practically run the Department of Conservation in Alabama.
Mm-hmm.
So it's going on all over the nation, and men and women who are decent, law-abiding Christian citizens, you need to take a stand and fight against them because they're promoting the Agenda 21 run by the United Nations.
That's right. That's right. Absolutely.
And I'm going to sit by on the side. Like I said, I was fired, and I have suffered greatly, my family and I. But I am not going to give up. And they just promoted a new conservation commissioner and a new governor, and maybe we can get some things changed around and get these covert, hostile, homosexual females out of the leadership. Yeah. Or possibly just get rid of them, period, is what we need to do. But anyway, let me get back out of the way.
Without the people actually standing up and doing the right thing, it takes direction from the masses, and I think, Jim, a lot of these people, the ordinary, decent people that Don is talking about here, are intimidated. These people that are members of these groups, they're just really nasty.
Well, that's true. That's exactly. A lot of people don't want to believe that that's the case, and other people just, you look at the American Revolution. They say a third of the people were loyalists, a third of them were, George Washington, the patriot types, and the other third didn't want anything to do with either side, just wanted to be left alone. So you're up against that a lot of times when you try to deal with these very hostile and radical forces. That's the truth.
Yeah.
That's the truth.
Listen, Don, I appreciate the call. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you so much.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Let's go to Eleanor in Ontario. Eleanor, thanks for holding on. Do we have Eleanor? Going once, going twice. Okay. If you want to call back in, you can certainly do that.
Darren, can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. Go ahead.
Okay. I just wanted to relate a little story about this rewilding insanity. I grew up in a town next to Wilton, Connecticut, which is the southwest corner, and literally in the shadow of New York City. You could practically see the skyscrapers from there. Mm-hmm. And there were no large predators at all. No coyotes. When I grew up, I never even saw a raccoon. Now, just recently in the local paper in Wilton, there's a photograph somebody took out their door of a bear in their backyard. And what's even more bizarre is when they called the police said, oh, well, that's quite normal for this area, which is absolute nonsense.
Yeah. I have something similar happening
they're rewilding
right here.
bears in the shadow of the New York skyscrapers is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
you're 100% right, ma'am. The bears are not managed anymore by the state fish and wildlife agencies to keep them in certain areas and keep them at certain population levels. It's like cougars. They're trying to encourage cougars here in the Midwest, in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and even in Iowa, places where these animals do not belong. The bears, they should be managed in like a place like Minnesota, so there are some in the northern part of the state that don't create too much trouble and can be hunted, and some people can enjoy seeing them near a park or something. They shouldn't be spread all over the place. And you're right, you look at New Jersey and all the trouble they're having over there with bears, and you look at coyotes, which are now in that area you're talking about. And in fact, in southwestern Connecticut, just like in eastern Pennsylvania, there was several incidents last year in the summer of coyotes trying to grab little kids out of backyards when they were trying to feed pups in a nearby den. So, these things should not be put up with, but people are being told that this is the way it is. Nature, those animals are here before we were, blah, 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 nonsense. And a lot of people buy into that. It means money and power and influence for some of these groups and some of these agencies, federal government and state.
You mentioned earlier the cougars. I was just going to say, we've never had those cougars being a problem around where I live. I remember hearing Jackie Petru on her broadcast some years ago talking about how they had them in Pennsylvania. She was discovering, and that she'd hear them howling across the road, and she was afraid to go outside. And then right after that, I found cougar tracks in my yard. And then shortly after that, it was reported on the news. Somebody actually shot a video just a mile or two down the road from where I live here. So we have them out here.
When they pop up here in the Midwest, the first thing that they say in the newspaper is the State Conservation Department reminds everyone that these are protected and they're native animals, blah, 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 and that you should be cautious around them, blah, 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 blah. They're very, very deadly animals. They do not belong in places where there's many people living, do not belong there at all. There was a case a couple of years ago in British Columbia where a yearling male cougar weighing, I think it was like 65 pounds. It was not hardly getting big at all yet, but they're very powerful animals, knocked a girl off her horse and started attacking her, and the mother on another horse jumped off and tried to drive the cougar off and yelled at the other daughter on the third horse to go get help. Mm-hmm. When they came back, that cougar had killed both of those women. So, I mean, they're extremely dangerous animals.
Yeah.
Now, again, if we want to live like they do for the last thousands of years in Central Asia and not leave little kids out of the house, not have dogs and cats that come into the house, and not have large flocks or not have large herds of animals around us, and protect our kids and accept the fact that some of our children are going to die each year and a few women are going to die when they go out in the snow to check the mailbox because they're not armed and some wolves happen along or there happens to be a cougar sitting in a tree somewhere. We don't want to live like that. We should not accept this, and the people in government and the people in the media that push this line and in the universities, we should go after them and get rid of them and get them fired out of those jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. Eleanor, did you have anything else that you wanted to add?
No, I just thought it was startling because that's a very urban area there, and that's just houses everywhere and no real wild range. And when I was growing up, there were no bears within 100 miles.
Yeah.
Yep. You're right. Thanks for calling, Eleanor.
I appreciate the call there, Eleanor. We got Jim in Arizona. Jim, go right ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning.
I'm a retired Forest Service firefighter, and I think I ran into just about the same kind of problem that Jim has. I filed a grievance, and they got rid of me. I was forced to retire in 2002, but where I was at was on Mount Graham, the Safford Ranger District, and I don't know, Jim, do you know anything about the Mount Graham red squirrel?
Yeah, I do, and yes, I do know a little bit about that, yeah. Yep.
Well, there was a study done in the late 1990s where they compared the genetics of that squirrel to the genetics of the squirrel up on Mugian Rim.
Mm-hmm.
And it came back and said, oh, no, well, they're genetically different. And the point I want to make is this is the idiocy of what's going on in our country.
You're 100%
Darren,
right. Yeah.
Me, you, and Darren are genetically different, but we're the same damn species.
Exactly. But, when you understand that the whole purpose of that is to get rid of grazing, to stop timber cutting, to stop, close roads down, to stop access, to further put an area out there that the state doesn't have too much to say about, that's what 99% of those listings are about.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I've also, and I don't think you're like this, but most of the biologists with the Forest Service, I think their one goal is to become an expert on some endangered species.
Well, that's where the money is. Now, think about this.
Well,
think about this. If I told you that red squirrels were endangered, you'd say, well, how do you know that? I would say, well, Jim in Arizona, he's the authority on red squirrels at the University of Arizona. And he's got a report out that says that there are fewer red squirrels now than there were 20 years ago or something.
Okay, hold on, guys. We have to take another break. We'll continue this. Stay with us, folks. We'll be right back. Here, this is Government America. I've been visiting for the last couple of hours with Jim Beers, and we have Jim in Arizona on the line. But real quickly, I want to give Jim's email address once again. It's Jim Beers, the number 7, at Comcast.net. Once again, Jim Beers 7 at Comcast.net. Jim, I don't know if you remember what you were saying just before I had to interrupt you.
Just real quickly, all of these listed endangered species, like Jim's talking about red squirrels here, with bats and turtles and all this stuff, you're told that it's endangered by some guy in a university who's the only one that knows about those things. Some guy who, when he grew up, thought everybody was ignoring red squirrels or turtles or snakes or bats or whatever it is. and he's armed with graduate students and DNA checks and all this kind of stuff, and he comes up with a fairy tale that the federal government then pays him for, and jumps on like a duck on a June bug to list these things as endangered. Now, who do you think they're going to go to when it comes time to manage these endangered species and do things for them? The only one that knows about it is a guy who was in the listing process. So he gets a lifetime thing. He gets more graduate students, more tenure at the university. The agency gets more employees in the Red Squirrel Project. They get more professors. They get more politicians, get all happy about the money that they're spending, because you and I read about old Senator Claghorn and how he's there cutting a ribbon around some red squirrel habitat improvement project or some other darn thing, and the whole thing is a big scam.
Yeah, and God help you if you have any of these that are found on your property, huh?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, you bet. And they can take it without, all you got to do is say, you can't cut your bushes anymore out there because this is important for warblers here north of Austin, Texas. You say, well, heck, I was going to sell these for lots to build homes on for my kids' college education. Well, that's too bad. You can't cut any of that. Got to leave it like it is. Well, you got to pay me for it? Well, no, we're the federal government. We don't have to pay for that. It's kind of like when the wolves kill livestock or dogs. We don't have to pay for that either. If they kill kids, we're not responsible.
Yeah.
That's exactly what's going on.
It's regrettable.
Oh, it's terrible. It's disgusting.
Regrettable. We regret that happened.
Oh,
that's just an unfortunate.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Jim in Arizona, you have anything else?
Yeah, I have a couple more points.
You have to make them quick, unfortunately.
Okay, well, I'm going to say that 90% of the people that work for the government have their hearts in the right place, and they really believe that they're just doing the right thing. The other point is before I went down to Safford, I got a call, and they wanted these heavy-gauge trash cans. Well, I had some in my boneyard, but that wasn't good enough. They went out and bought brand new ones, camouflaged them, filled them with sunflower seeds, and stuck them out by the squirrel middens, And they had to pull them out after a couple of months because they found out the goshawks and the spotted owls were sitting over those things waiting on the squirrels. So I just thought that was a funny story, but that's the idiocy of what's going on.
Yep.
Absolutely. Hey, I appreciate the call there, Jim. God bless you. And Jim.
Oh, God bless you too.
Jim Beard.
Don't.
Thank you for being with us. Sorry we had to cut you off there, Jim in Arizona. We are just flat out of time. We're going to have to make it sooner than a year, Jim.
Well, you give me a call, and I'll be glad to do it if I can.
All right, always a pleasure to have you. And, folks, once again, Jim Beers at Comcast.net.
Jim Beers 7.
I'm sorry, Jim Beers 7 at Comcast.net. Thank you. God bless you, folks, and we'll talk to you next week.